This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, producer of the show. This week, Linda Darling-Hammond and Anne Podolsky from the Learning Policy Institute and authors of our latest Think Again brief, Do the Returns to Teacher Experience Fizzle Out, join Mike and David to talk about whether teachers really stop improving after just a few years on the job. Then, on the Research Minute, Adam shares a study on whether school board turnover is actually linked to school improvement and student success. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And now, please join me in welcoming this week's special guests, Linda Darling-Hammond and Anne Podolsky of the Learning Policy Institute. Linda and Anne, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Also joining us, as always, my colleague, David Griffith.
Hey, Mike. Always a pleasure.
David's over there in the dark because it is already nighttime in England where he is zooming in from. So I hope you're not up too late past your bedtime.
It's definitely past my bedtime somewhere, but I'm hanging in there.
All right, great. Yeah, well, Linda, I would think it's fair to say that you need no introduction. I think, there's only a few people in education that could go by a first name, kind of like Madonna. And I think Checker, certainly, there's a few of you. But I think you are the only one who can go by their initials in education. That some people you say LDH, people know who we're talking about. So, but do tell you're the founder of the Learning Policy Institute, distinguished professor at Stanford. Is that the right language these days?
Yeah, I'm a retired professor at Stanford.
Yep.
Yeah.
And still on the California State Board as well.
President of the California State Board of Education, which keeps me kind of busy.
Yeah, no, well, that's great. Well, you've been having a huge impact on education policy for many years, and it's so exciting to have you on the show and to work with you on a joint product that Learning Policy Institute and Fordham did together. And you are at the Learning Policy Institute. Tell me what's your title there?
So I have been with the Learning Policy Institute for, I guess, almost started working there about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I am a researcher and I focus on teachers and school leaders, how we attract them, how we keep them, how we make sure all kids have access to great teachers and leaders.
All right. Well, that is what we're going to talk about today, gang. And it's because we noticed some things that you all had been writing about teacher effectiveness as teachers make their way through their career. And it made us think again, which is the title of a series we've been doing on policy briefs that challenge the conventional wisdom. So let's talk all about that on Ed Reform Update. So, Linda, and the conventional wisdom when it comes to teachers and effectiveness is that teachers get dramatically better in the first couple of years on the job. I think any of us spent any time in the classroom totally understand that. It is very hard as a new teacher. You get a lot better those first couple of years, maybe even until, say, about the fifth year. But there was research showing that after that, most teachers, on average, not all teachers, but most teachers, the median teacher, kind of hits a plateau after about 5 years or so, and then they maintain their effectiveness from there on out. And you can imagine this has a lot of implications if you're somebody who hires teachers or you're a superintendent trying to decide how much to invest in teacher recruitment versus retention, salaries, and all the like, that this pattern is something that you might pay attention to. But in this brief, you argue that conventional wisdom is actually incorrect. It's out of date. So why don't we start with you, Anne? Tell us, what does the research actually show?
Sure. So we reviewed the most recent studies that use the most rigorous methods, which allow researchers to track teachers over time and link them to their students. And these studies, over 2/3 of them find that teachers, in fact, continue to improve in their effectiveness at raising student achievement as measured by student test scores. And that 2/3 of these studies find that teachers continue to improve into the second decade, and some even find into the third decade of a teacher's career. And so I think our findings are different than this conventional wisdom for two key reasons. The first is that starting about 20 years ago, states started creating these really large-scale data sets that allowed researchers to do this method that we're describing, which is called a teacher fixed effect. So again, it just means that a researcher is able to link a teacher to a student and track that teacher over time and compare how that individual teacher is effective in her first year compared to her fifth, her 10th, et cetera. And so that's really a much more precise method. Before that, researchers had to do something called a cross-sectional analysis, which you could think of as a snapshot in time. So they might look at a given year, say, 2020, and look at all teachers that are in their first year in 2020 versus their fifth versus their 15th. And you can imagine there could be many reasons why teachers of different experience levels in one given year might be different in their effectiveness, say if the labor market was different when they entered. So that's why those analyses aren't quite as ideal. And then I think the second reason that the findings are different than this conventional wisdom is due to how researchers would categorize experience. So some of these older studies would tend to limit the years that they looked at. So they might bucket all years of experience teachers had 6 or more years together and just say, we're just going to say, look at years 1 through 6 and just say everybody above that's kind of all the same and there aren't meaningful differences, which we now know there are. And so you lost a lot of that nuance. And then other studies would have those same buckets, but they might be different. It might be like looking at teachers in their first through fifth year and sixth through 10th and 11th through 15th. And again, this assumes that there aren't material differences within those buckets. And so that can really limit the conclusions you might have when reviewing those studies.
All right, that's great, Anne. Thank you. That's super helpful. So my understanding is that even though it is true that teachers continue to make progress throughout their career, the curve is very steep in those first couple of years, right? As must be the case in just about any profession that you would find. We just get a lot better on the job, and then it does slow down. But in most of these studies, the teachers keep making progress, but more so in certain kinds of schools than others. So, Linda, tell us about that piece. Because, by the way, it seemed like terrible news that teachers weren't getting better after year 5 or so, which would seem to indicate, my God, we must be doing a terrible job helping teachers, get better. And so this is good news that they do keep getting better, but more so in some schools than others. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that's come up over the years is, are you having more years of experience or are you having 1 year of experience over and over again because there's nothing in the environment to allow you to grow? So yes, we do have some evidence that if you're in an environment there's professional colleagues and collaboration, where there's professional supports, you see a larger growth in effectiveness for teachers over many years. And that stands to reason. Now, not every school has that set of conditions. And one of the interesting things is, how do you prepare principals to create the conditions under which teachers can be more effective? And that's part of the, I think, research yet to be done.
Yeah, no, it's that is very, very important. And so when you think about this, Linda, I mean, it seems like common sense. Of course, we should always worry about retention. I mean, we know in any field of endeavor, it's super expensive to find new people and to train them. And so teaching's not different from that. So, but does this tell us something about what maybe the way we think about paying teachers should be different, or, maybe it means that the regular salary schedule most places have makes sense as teachers make more money as they get more experienced and they're getting more effective, maybe, or should we mix things up? I mean, how do you think about this?
Well, I think there are different decisions made about salary schedules. Some districts front load the beginning teacher salary and don't have much ongoing growth in the salary schedule. Others, have bargained ongoing large growth in the salary schedule, and so there are differences in the ways in which salary schedules are structured. Some places also have recruitment bonuses or retention bonuses and other elements of the compensation. I think one implication that is reinforced by another study we did is that you do need to have enough growth in the salary schedule to keep people, and you're benefiting from the additional effectiveness that they're bringing to their job jobs, including their capacity perhaps to mentor beginning teachers. So you want enough growth in the salary schedule that people aren't leaving after a few years because they don't have enough to look forward to in that regard. And we did find in another study of attrition that it was the top end of the scale that was more predictive of retention than the bottom end of the scale. So those kinds of things do matter. And in some places where it's been hard to get and keep teachers, they have found that retention stipends and bonuses can make a difference as well. So those kinds of things are things that districts need to consider if they want to get the benefit of greater effectiveness from experience.
No, that makes sense. And what's your take, Anne, too, on sort of some of those softer things? Maybe it's hard to measure. Maybe do we know, like inside the black box, like what are these schools doing that are helping teachers get better over time? Is it really good professional learning? Is it something about their other teachers that are in those schools? Like, what is it?
So a few of the studies we reviewed looked at some of those characteristics. So one, for example, found that as teachers accumulate experience in the same grade level or in the same subject area or district, that they had higher returns to their experience, meaning they're improving at a greater rate. And so I think there's something to be said there about trying to support stability in teacher assignments. And then another study has also found that teacher, and again, it's very logical and intuitive, but teachers whose colleagues are more experienced are also conferring benefits to that teacher, to other teachers and to their students. So I think, again, doing everything you can to incentivize that stability and retention is so important.
Yeah, no. And the listeners are tired of me saying this. I say it so many times, but we are just not doing enough to make sure that teachers, especially in these high poverty schools, are getting paid what they need to come to those schools and to stay in those schools. Right. Yeah. And we've got to figure out how to get this done. There's some, we can look at DC and we can look now in some places in Texas. I mean, there's a few places that are, really trying to provide serious, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 stipends for teachers to teach in these neediest schools. That's what it's going to take. But it's, unfortunately, you just can't find too many of these places, and I don't know. I mean, do you see in California or elsewhere, Linda, places that are starting to invest in that sort of thing?
Well, we do have a policy in California which supports national board certification and board certified teachers who are accomplished teachers who usually are more effective, not only themselves, but as mentors to beginning teachers. If they go to priority schools, which are high poverty schools, they get $5,000 a year over 5 years to, stay in that school. Part of the goal is not only to attract and keep people there, and sometimes schools are helping their own teachers become board certified. But the other piece is to have the mentoring capacity, because if you get these schools where there are a lot of beginning teachers and they come and they go and they don't get much help, which again, leads to them feeling less effective and leaving, then you can't ever change that vicious cycle. So, getting some stability, getting some experienced teachers who are effective also helps keep those beginning teachers so that they can become more effective over time as well. And that does seem to be making an effect in a number of schools.
All right. Well, great. We will leave it there. Linda and Anne, thank you so much both for doing the great brief and for joining us on the show. I should say the title of their new brief, it's called Think Again, Do the Returns to Teacher Experience Fizzle Out? And now we know that the answer to that is no, that they keep going strong and that there are things schools can do to make that more likely. So again, Anne and Linda, thanks so much. Hope to have you back on the show sometime soon.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Adams Research Minute. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
How'd that sound? Adams Research Minute. It's kind of got a ring to it, huh?
Oh, do I have my own Fiona Apple song or what's going on with that?
A good question. We'll have to ask producer Stephanie whether we mixed it up or not.
Adams Research Minute. Is that really what we're calling it?
Adams Research Minute.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Well, how much do we pay the creative department for that name? I mean, that's...
Yes, exactly. Hey, man, that is, I am the creative department, Adam.
Okay, all right. I thought maybe I got a research corner or research half hour of power or something. I don't know. It's not minutes, so.
No, it's supposed to be a minute. So let's get back to that.
Yeah. All right.
And, but I should say, David very kindly zooming in all the way from London because he did not want to miss your inaugural official Adams Research Minute.
It's true. It's true. The sun never sets on Adams Research Minute. Although it is dark here.
This could be David post pub. So this is exciting. We'll see what he has to say.
All
right, let's get into it, Adam. What you got
British
for us
accent already? Okay. Yeah. Today on the Research Minute, we have got a new study from some Ohio State friends, Vlad Kogan, Stefan Lavertu, and their co-author that takes on a controversial assumption about school boards. Are school board elections actually democratic? This is not a rhetorical question. The local school board is the most common elected office in America. About 50,000 people sit on school boards nationwide, and yet these elections are often uncontested or barely contested. So to help us better understand school board elections, and the researchers pulled together what's probably the largest data set of its kind, including hand-coded records from districts, counties, and state agencies. After preparing all that data, they analyzed about 28,000 school board contests across 16 states from 2002 to 2017. The result is a panoramic view of who runs, who wins, and whether any of that has to do with how schools are actually performing. So what do they find? Well, let's start with some basic facts. 45% of school board elections go uncontested. And when only one member is up for election at a time, that number climbs to about 55%. Among incumbents who run again, more than 80% win. But what they also find is that school boards experience really high turnover. On average, over half of school board seats turn over every election cycle. The reason for that is that incumbent school board members don't actually run all that often. Only about 6 in 10 seek re-election, and that's lower than in most state or federal elections. Most board members just step aside at the end of their terms. Now, the researchers are political scientists, and they wanted to know whether school performance factors into whether incumbents are reelected. So to do this, they link their election data with academic data from the Stanford Education Data Archive. First, they examine raw test scores, finding that student achievement is positively correlated with incumbent reelection and negatively correlated with overall school board turnover. But because the schools have much less control over average student proficiency than they do over student progress, then they turn to our favorite metric, academic growth, which is obviously a better indicator of school quality. What they find then is that there is a very weak relationship between performance of the school district and the incumbent's reelection prospects. They say that, for example, a district increasing student growth from the bottom 10% nationally to the top 10% would mean just a 2 percentage point increase in the probability that an incumbent board member would be reelected. In other words, voters aren't reliably rewarding school boards that help students learn more. One thing we're always curious about is the kind of institutional context. For example, like our elections on cycle, meaning that they align with the normal election calendar and aren't on some obscure date when there aren't any other elections, and whether that has any effect. And the answer, at least in this study, is no. The authors find no evidence that election timing makes school performance more salient to voters. Now, to me, the implication of all of this, and I'll end with this, is that for all the talk about democratic local control of election, school board elections aren't actually very democratic. They feature little competition, they have high levels of incumbent exit, and there are only weak links between school performance and electoral outcomes. And while the study doesn't take a position on hot button stuff like state takeovers and appointed boards or charter schools, it does suggest that the critiques of those reforms that involve invoking the sanctity of local democratic control might be relying on a pretty unrealistic version of how that control is actually exercised.
Very nicely done, Adam. And I'm glad you included that last part because I have to say, I love these guys. I know them well from our work in Ohio. But the so what question is the big one for me because I firmly believe that school boards are not going away. I know I wouldn't be super sad if they did. Checker has written about that for years and years. Many others have as well about how school boards on the whole are likely to do more harm than good because they're so easily taken over by adult interests, especially the unions, because they don't focus much on achievement, yada, yada. Yet, you try to take away the school boards. It doesn't seem like something that's going to happen. So I guess as a rhetorical point to critics who say, oh, well, charter schools are not democratically run, it's a good counterpoint. But that to me seems to be the main thing here. I mean, what do you think, David? As you look across from the pond where they do not have school boards.
Well, I'm not going to try to link it to like British governance here. But I will say, I mean, it seems like there are multiple overlapping problems here, right? Just the level of turnover struck me as problematic, right? We always complain about the fact that congressmen basically never leave, right? But there is such a thing as too much turnover, and there's such a thing as, like, I don't know, you can't do most jobs well when you walk in the door. There's a learning curve, and that goes for legislators too, and I assume it goes for school board members, right? And so, if people are constantly cycling in, figuring out where the light switches are, shaking the hand of the union rep or whoever, saying, "Oh, it's nice to meet you," and then walking out the door at, within a month or two, of course, nothing ever really changes, right? And so just, at the level of like just basic institutional functionality, that strikes me as really problematic. And
Isn't
then
it weird? Sorry, David, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that I thought was interesting was just at a descriptive level that turnover was higher, I think, in the low achieving districts, right? I assume because it's just everything about them is just challenging. And, it's just not fun to be constantly wrestling with sort of really challenging social problems that show up in schools and budget cuts and that sort of thing. I mean, is that your interpretation, Adam? You're shaking your head, I feel like.
I think that turnover is similar. Actually, the lower achieving districts the incumbents were more likely to run again, but they were also more likely to lose. There was a little more contestation in those places. So I think turnover is kind of similar across those contexts.
Okay.
I think one thing that's kind of weird to me about all of this is that we don't pay school board members anything, and they have very little resources. When you talk to school board members, I mean, the district has resources, so they ask the district stuff, but they don't really have their own resources. It's kind of a volunteer job. And so, at least in most cases, that's the case. And so, like, why would you want to stick around in a job that's probably pretty thankless, that you probably have very little, like, levers for really changing things, at least as an individual member? And then you're not getting paid or anything. So really, any job would be better than that. So maybe you could jump into local politics in another respect and at least, get some token income off of it.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, I think there's a few big districts that pay some kind of stipend, maybe, but it's just a token, like you say, and so that's not going to be a factor. And look, maybe I'm poo-pooing this too much. I mean, it is important to be able to say that this is a fraud when people think that we have a democratically run local school districts. What we really have is a system where there's not very much local accountability. And then we try to have accountability to the states and to the federal government. So, everybody's in charge, nobody's in charge. You compare that to how we run most of local government, which is that the police chief just reports to the mayor or to the county commissioner. And so does the fire chief, and so does the, sanitation people, et cetera, et cetera. And then, that person has to stand before voters every 4 years usually, and elections that get, probably not great turnout compared to presidential elections, but pretty good turnout. And so, that is the real question is, if we wanted to have more, a public education system that was more responsive to the will of local communities, a strong argument that having that kind of mayoral control, county control, something where, the general purpose politician is held accountable would make more sense. Yeah.
I mean, Mike, do you think there's any universe in which even in that universe, do you think that there's actually a relationship between academic growth and I don't know, and a mayor's odds of getting reelected?
No, probably not. And look, I mean, let's be honest, there's a lag, right? The growth is probably a lagging indicator. I mean, that's based on decisions that were probably made years ago. So that's tricky. I mean, I think that we do know that parents pay attention to it. If you put it in front of them and give them a choice, they will choose the higher growth schools. We've seen that from, some experiments at least. So, this stuff can matter, but what's going to break through to parents, but also to other voters who are not parents is probably, the big scandals. But certainly, if there's a sense that there's a superintendent who's got a plan and who is, helping the schools get better, exuding confidence, that's something that people might know about. This, of course, gets caught up also in the big question around levies. And, when the school boards have to go in front of the voters to get tax increases, basically. Does that make sense? Should they have their own taxing authority? Or does it make sense for that to be part of the general purpose government, as it is in a few places like where I live in Montgomery County, Maryland? And so then, again, the debate at that point, you can have a debate about trade-offs. We want to fund the budget for schools, then we got to talk about tax increases, or you got to talk about cuts to other things. And to me, that's democracy in action, right? Rather than trying to have the, wall off schools as a separate thing. We don't do this for police, we don't do it for the fire department. In most places, I don't think we do it for parks. It's just a quirk of history. And I think it's very hard to argue that there's much upside. And so, this is yet more evidence on that pile. So there you go. All right, gang, we got to let David get to bed over there. So
hey, the night is young.
All right. Well, but it's not for us. So that is all the time.
We have no idea what time it is.
Yeah. That is all the time that we've got for this week. So until next week,
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.